psychological first aid in primary care. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. We'll jump right into it. Has everybody got their slide program in front of them? So we're following along in the same place. Psychological first aid. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My background is wildland fire. I was a firefighter for 25 years. 15 years in, I had been burned over a couple of times, lost a buddy on the fire line, found out about some of this crisis work that was available, started using it, put together teams, got trained in 87, actually, for the first one, CISM stuff. And by the time I retired, 25 in, we had teams, the state of Minnesota well saturated with crisis teams. It still is today. The Cornerstone Whole Health Organization is a new organization that's come up, just really going full guns on everything that's needed in the crisis world, and especially your line of work. So I've got a series of slides we'll go through as we go through the hour here. Write down your questions, send them to Annie, like she said. This is a statement from COVID-19, just given out by Morgenstein. So what he's saying is, it is important to realize that the psychological and behavioral effects of disasters are experienced by more people over a greater geography across a much larger period of time than all other medical effects combined. Important for disaster resource planning. I read that to him. I'm not going to read all these slides to you, but I read that one because he hits on a lot of good points. The psychological first aid. What is it? An evidence-based practice that is used to address psychological disasters during the pandemic and during anything. We've been using psychological first aid since Oklahoma City. What is it? Next slide. What is it? Where do we do it? Why do we do it? And who does it? Okay. Psychological first aid, by definition. And definition was first set up for psychological first aid, like I say, in Oklahoma City. It refined after 9/11, and since then it's just become a cornerstone for what we do in crisis work. It's a set of skills that helps community residents care for their families, neighbors, themselves by basic psychological support of traumatic events. There's 4 principles to basic standards for the principles and techniques of psychological first aid. One is consistent with the research evidence on risk and resilience, built on that. It's applicable and practicable in any field setting, every field setting. I've been to probably 100 places over the last 20 years that everything was different, but this still works. Psychological first aid was still our main tool. It's appropriate to developmental levels across the lifespan. So we work with 3-year-olds, we work with 33-year-olds, we work with 93-year-olds. It's just taking it from a different perspective. And it's culturally informed. So if we are deploying a Spanish-speaking community, we'll for sure have Spanish-speaking people providing our psychological first aid. It also is a model that integrates public health, community, and individual psychology. We just put this together. No matter who we are, here's some guidelines for doing work when an event has just happened and people are really overwhelmed. Include preparedness for communities, workplaces, schools, faith communities, families, churches, anybody that needs or is going to be working in that environment. It doesn't rely on direct service by mental health professionals. You don't have to be a mental health professional to provide psychological first aid. In fact, our first deployment with it long ago, there were more firefighters and law enforcement than there were mental health on our team. And it uses the skills that you bring to the table. You're very good with talking with young people. That's going to be your forte when we deploy. When we set up a team to go, we pick out who's got what background and experience, and that's how we work it. So there's three parts to the psychological first aid skills, very simply. Understanding the components and symptoms and responses that go along with trauma. Being an active listener, being a good listener, and know what resources are available. So most of our work is done on the crisis scene when we're doing psychological first aid. We, as in Green Cross or CISM teams, we're called there because of the event. We're called to provide psychological first aid, and so we brand ourselves, let them know very clearly who we are. We have hats and vests and things like that. So they know why we're there. We get in with the incident command, so they tell us where they would like to have us working. And our people are mainly just really good listeners. Friendly. I mean, the first one I deployed with myself, one of us was a car salesman. Another was a nurse. Another was a retired school teacher. So doesn't matter who you are, where you're at, you bring to the table what you've got, and that's how we share it. What it is and isn't. Psychological first aid is a supportive intervention used immediately after disasters, in the aftermath, terrorism, any impactful event. The last time I used it myself right here was a young 4-year-old went missing, actually in the cornfield. But the group, the parents, family, neighbors were all so overwhelmed that I just put on my psychological first aid hat, and they gave me a corner, had some handouts, and just talked them out. Said, "Oh, what's the worst part of it?" So I'll get into more of that. It is another tool for disaster stress management. In fact, it's being recognized as one of our better tools available immediately. In fact, I haven't got a quote on this, but 2017, Johns Hopkins University sent out the actual the first book that identifies exactly what psychological first aid is and isn't. I'd advise you to look that up. It's a $12 book that really has a lot of information in it. And what we're doing is not therapy. We might have therapy workers. It might seem therapeutic, but it's not therapy. It's crisis intervention. Why do we do it? Why is there to call for it and so strong, and why do we do it? Because it relieves the immediate stress of those who are impacted. If we're called into an ongoing event, there's emergency services folks are doing their job and don't have time to answer questions. They're happy to see us get in with our green hats and come in and just start talking to people. So everybody that's impacted will get psychological first aid. Where do we do it? Diverse settings. So no matter where it is, what it is, no matter who's involved, we provide psychological first aid. So we're going to do it on scene, right? They're still putting on fire. In fact, when I worked with a lot with Fargo, their team would deploy with the fire departments if they laid out a 4-inch hose. That was their clue to activate the team and get on scene. So staging areas where things are collected or placed or put, shelters, field hospitals, worked there a lot. Businesses, after the floods in New Orleans, we worked with Humane Society, and we worked with them on site while they were there. And then we embedded some of our crisis team with them back in the main office back in Maryland, because they got back to, they were there a month and they got a month of work backed up because nobody was doing their work while they were there. So we do it any place, anywhere, for anybody. Disaster mental health focuses on normal people who are responding to an abnormal event. It says 80% of people exposed to a critical incident will have some kind of reaction within the first 3 weeks. As we're looking at the COVID system, we're finding that it's 90 to 100%. Everybody's affected somewhat. There's not anybody that I go anywhere that isn't affected somehow on it. Somebody's not working or not doing things or doing things they typically wouldn't do. This set of slides, it just identifies, there's an 80% slide that says 80% of any given group are affected to some degree when an event happens. With the COVID, 100%, 99% at least. And 40 to 50% are living in fear and response all the time. I was just over the VA on Monday, and most of them I'm working with in there are fine, and a couple of them are so scared they can't even talk to themselves, much less to anybody else, because they're meeting all these people that might have it. Behavior change, you're going to see a lot of that because of the COVID. It was forced on us, number one, and number two, I think what's going to become a way of life almost for a lot of the changes that are happening. They're going to do a lot of it that way. Perception of risk during pandemics. And this is a pandemic. This is another article. It's quoted, all of these are quoted and back listed where you can get the information if you want more on them. Pandemics result in unique responses, protracted fear, uncertainty, isolation, anger, misinformation, faltering confidence in the government and in institutions, going to alter the perception of people and how it works and why it works. And anyway, Brooks come up with, there's 5 essential elements of psychological first aid that need to be addressed when we're working COVID and other. Safety, number 1. That the mask is the biggest piece of safety that we've got going with COVID. Social connectedness, we're losing that because everybody's kind of staying home. And so where you can get it, when you can do something, we're helping them to do that. Calming, let them know that they're not alone, that the things that they're going through are very natural and normal, that there is going to be an end to it, there's hope and optimism, and identifying the way we are handling it. We're doing well. We're handling it ourselves, or the community are handling it very well compared to what it is, with ideas of what it is. Another quote from the group COVID working folks, this is Walter's. Fear, worry about the future, grief and loss, normal. The areas of that are impacted by the event, socially, psychologically, and economically, we are really at the wall in some places. We're hearing and seeing increased reports of anxiety, irritability, anger, depression, insomnia, and sleep, family conflict, loneliness, isolation because we have to do that, fatigue because we're not getting the rest we need, and poor health behaviors, reduced activity, snacking, emotional eating, all of those things are weighing on us. Our targets are to restore safety for physical health, psychological health to facilitate function, and behavioral health to empower action. Now, this started back with compassion fatigue back, as I said, in Oklahoma City. The next big event that really impacted it, that we used it for months and months, was 9/11 in the towers. In fact, I deployed with the state of Pennsylvania, called me in to run in with their groups because they were right close and they were in there on the ground the next day. I also deployed with the Salvation Army out of Minnesota 3 or 4 times, and that was really an eye opener. That was probably some of the best work I got to do with 9/11 at that time, because they had set up a food facility right at ground zero, and we were working in that, myself and 6 or 8 Salvation Army folks. And this was in 2001, right? And we're from Fargo. The whole group is from Fargo except me. But the movie Fargo had just come out. And so the first group comes in, the first morning we're there, we get to BSing with everybody, and my friend Bill tells him, well, he's from Fargo. Oh, you got them wood choppers out there, right? Yeah. So we start talking, so they start teasing them. So he bought into it, and just kind of joked with them. Well, that was morning break. Afternoon break, there was about 25 people come in because they'd heard about this joker from Fargo and they wanted to talk to him. And so he did it again. He just built on it a little bit more. Yeah, we know better than to turn him head first into them chippers. You got to stick him in feet first to get it right and things like that. But we got back our little room at night, and he said, I think there's something to this case. We're getting our mind off it for a few minutes is what we're doing. And so he put together all kinds of scenarios. So the next day, I kid you not, by afternoon, we've got about 100 people coming to our tent to eat, to get their lunch, because the Fargo guy is there. And he's talking about the thing they did and they didn't, and very humorous. And when we got back, we were there for 10 days. And when we got back, the Minnesota organization here got a letter of thank you that was probably the strongest written from the city of New York, because for that 10 days we were there, these people out there digging through grime and picking up body parts had something they could get away with, some way to get away from it for a little bit. And that's what psychological first aid is. That's what we were doing. So the target organs here, target outcomes. Okay, physical, psychological, and behavioral. Safety, physical safety, and diminishing the physiological stress response. So if you're on site and you're working with people, the first thing you want to do is have them identify who you are real easy. Have your vest or hats or caps or whatever that says you're part of the safety team. And almost all of our work is done with handouts in one hand and a bottle of water in the other, and come up, we would talk to people, see somebody really suffering, or maybe just sitting and say, need any water? And start talking. Let's walk away over here. Let's get over here beside the out of the way from the people working. Function. Psychological functions are perceived sense of safety and control. That was well in place after the first few days. By the time I got there with the second team, it was a lot different. They were checking out things, that people were wearing masks, and we had a number of people deploy that were actually training in New York at the time. The Green Cross did, and we just shut down their training, and they went over to 9/11, and a lot of them got 9/11 disease. In fact, I have one friend that's still alive from it that goes to somewhere in Asia once a year and gets a treatment that keeps her alive, keeps her going. But kind of the work we were doing, that we were doing for them, was to make sure they got out of the way. You know, we would find a spot for them that's safe for them, and we'd be able to talk to them. And the action, usually actions that they're doing something to help is what this is all about. That's the action part of it. Try to get them through the disaster, try to get them back to normal activities. How do you do that? How do we do that? Use skills you already have. And the skills you already have in a more effective manner, and learn to identify when to use them. I'll give you a, for instance, we deployed to New Orleans after the hurricane and flood and all. And actually, ladies are president of Green Cross right now. Our team was in there, and she just doing everything like she should. You know, I was back home running this role from there. We had 3 teams out. Anyway, Mary always comes up with some way to do things right. And what she did was, we were working, our teams were working on an 80-acre horse facility that had been turned over to the Humane Society for managing the animals that were in 9/11 or in the flood, in the hurricane. And there were 3 sets of people that we were working with. One was the finders, the group that would go out and actually call would come in, there's a dog at this place, or I hear a cat or whatever. And the teams would go out and get those animals and bring them in. And many times they were finding they were living because they were feeding on their owners and things like that. Really, really bad stuff. And so for that team, we changed people in it every day, but we also did a defusing every day at the end of our shift for them, just so they could dump what they needed to. The second group were the people working with the animals as they were brought in. So the animals were brought in by group 1, given to group 2, and group 2 went through every animal, checked them over, made sure they were okay, treated anything they needed treating, give them the right shots and all that. And that group we just checked in with once a day. They were pretty healthy in their own mental professionals. And so the third group was the group we wanted to go visit when we needed to feel better, because that's the group that put the owner and the pet together. And one day I'm working in there, and the guy comes in looking for his pet python. And there's quite a few pythons in cages, and he walks right over and picks up his python and walks out. And how in the hell do you know your own python? I don't know, but he did. But anyway, those 3 areas, what we worked in Green Cross was there for, we were there for, well, till they closed it down, 6 or 8 weeks. And then we also embedded some folks in their home office again. So explain this. The mind interprets the situation as a threat, responds with a nervous system activation. We're going to get into that more. There's 132 chemicals mixed in your body when you go into a stress situation. And we'll be talking about that a bit. But you know, you just need to know, and we tell the people that we're working with that you're experiencing normal reactions to an abnormal event. Let them know that it's normal. Don't pathologize it. Help them process it. Have them identify what it is. Anyway, I was telling you about Mary and the area, and there's big Quonset huts there, big sheds, and we were nosing around in one and found the Mardi Gras beach for New Orleans. So Mary being Mary, the next morning when we started our shift, she went over there and she got a box of beads down, and she loaded up from her shoulders up till over her nose with beads, almost. And she would go along, she was out there working with, we usually were, and she'd see somebody that needs some help or needed to talk or stopped, and she said, I'll give you some beads if you will tell me something good that happened to you since you've been here. So she did that all day. She did 3 sets of beads. And the next day, we had people saying, "Where's that bead lady? I got somebody here that needs to talk to her." So she became pretty well known as the bead lady all the time we were there. She was doing that from that time on. That's why I share that. That's the kind of thing you do. You take what's there, you work with people, get on their side and go. We want them to feel safe and comfortable. So ask them when we can to do things that are active, practical, and familiar, things they typically do. Ensure safety, move them to a safer location, find appropriate officials, remove broken glass, anything like that. If medical concerns, there's a med tent. You need to, we find that out right away where that is, and we send people there or take people to it. And information, mostly the handouts that we had were sometimes some things that the overhead team would want us to share, but mainly just taking care of themselves. There's paper today we're talking about what you've been taking. Here's a little test you can take, and if you score over 80 on it, you should come talk to one of us, type of thing. Attend to physical safety and comfort. If we can get them someplace in the shade, because it's 100 degrees down there, or water, or a blanket, or a chair, or food, or the only air-conditioned place thing on that whole 80 acres was the Red Cross sleeping area. They had 200 beds in there. And every day we would go around and put handouts on each one of those beds. Well, our team would take turn every day. One of us would get that 2 hours of air conditioning. So that was looked forward to and kind of joked about, but it really did help. Another thing we did was we were 15 miles from the nearest town and the nearest Starbucks. And so we had our own van. So each of us, one day, one of us would take the van and go get Starbucks for everybody. So everybody on the team got away for a couple hours every day. It was their day to turn. So we could get away from it a little bit. Doing things like that keeps your team alive. And there's also psychological first aid for the team. We give practical assistance, don't pie in the sky or things they want. What do you need most right now? That's the main psychological first aid question. What do you need right now? Can I connect you with resources for food, assistance, anything else? Anything we can do to help them, if they can tell us what they need, we can find a way to do something about it. We have local resources that we called on, long-term resources, things that they can find, things. If we didn't get involved much with folks that lost everything, but for those folks, there was a whole setup there with the overhead teams that they could get papers, they could get sleeping areas, they could get trailer houses, things like that. Handouts of materials, disaster stress management, and the normal reactions. As I say, every day we would have a different handout, and we would hand it out to anybody we're talking to. We'd also paste it on the inside of the toilet doors, and we'd hang them up in the shower room stalls, the shower rooms. Every day we'd have something different, and that was part of what we got done. And when they quoted us or thanked us at the end of that, that's one of the things they thanked us for, was doing that. What do people need? Most people need just somebody to talk to, somebody to vent with, and a listener. If you're a good listener, you're going to do good with psychological first aid. You just need somebody to care, somebody to listen, somebody to lean on or cry with, somebody to be present for. That the ones that we had the hardest time with were the ones that needed us the most, of course. I would know working mountain slide in the state of Washington, a third of a mountain came down, took out 87 houses that were on the side of the mountain, and no one survived that. If they were home, they died, type of thing. And we were out working, Green Cross was called in that day, and we were out there for about 6 weeks. I was there for the first couple of weeks, and we were at what they call the edge of the mud. because it was all mud from this mountain coming down, and the workers were out there digging through and finding body parts and things. And one of the workers brought up an older lady, older female, to us, and she just looked like death warmed over. I mean, she was really hurting. You could see that. And he said, I found her out here wandering around, and she's carrying that piece of wood. And she isn't talking. So can you guys help me with her? Can you check with her? That's what we did. So Peggy and I walked her over to our little tent, asked her if she wanted something to drink. We got her some coffee. And we just talked about the weather and the things that were going on, not what had affected her. And she finally started talking, and she said, see this piece of wood? That's a shingle off my son's roof. That's the only thing I could find. I lost my son, my daughter-in-law, and 3 godchildren in the slide. This is what I got to show for. That's the kind of work we're doing. Just be there for them, let them talk, share. Peg took her over to the main area and got her hooked in with some of the friends that she got that lived in town that survived, and psychological first aid, all of it. The 2 things we do specifically, express genuine care, let them know that we care about them, and normalize everything they're going through. So you're not going crazy. You're not going nuts. You're having natural reactions to an abnormal event. Psychological first aid, we're talking stress. Let's do a little definition work here. Hans Selye is the father of stress as we know it. He's an Austrian doctor, wrote 3,700 articles, 17 books on it. Non-specific response of the body to any demand placed on it. Some of wear and tear in the body. The key to stress management requires identifying that concept. So stress is the non-specific response of the body to any demand placed on it, wear and tear in the body. Some of us get a headache, some of them get other aches start coming out, old aches and so on. Okay. Talked a little bit about the chemical dump, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Now, there's 132 chemicals mixed in your body when your body goes into the stress response. And that's so that we survive. It's the chemical reaction that's built into us from caveman days. And I'll get into it a bit more in a bit, but first I want to show you the brain and how stress works with the brain. And I liken it to alcohol. It works the same way as does alcohol. So the man takes a drink, the drink takes the drink, the drink takes the man. And the first thing that's overwhelmed is the reasoning part of the brain, right? Front brain. Doesn't pay to argue with their drunk, even discuss much, because they're working from their emotions. There's no reason that they can get to the reasoning part of the brain. If they drink enough and their emotional part of the brain is overwhelmed, all that's left is the brain stem. That's the liver and lights and lungs and things that work on their own. And if that's overwhelmed, they die. So with that in mind, talk about the chemistry of survival. 132 chemicals that mixed in your body when your body's in distressed response. 3 areas of chemicals. You have the catecholamines, that's the fight or flight chemicals, the ones that really save us, to kick in and we can get out of there. We get superhuman strength and all kinds of things. It triggers the increased nervous system, kicks in, excites the whole system. The fight or flight means we can either survive or get out of there, whatever we need to do. The second area of chemicals, and the bigger one, is the corticosteroids. And their job is to moderate and control the extremes of the catecholamines. Keep that fight or flight in check. Herein lies our first chemical problem, because the greater the catecholamine drive, the less corticosteroids there are. And when you're in full-blown crisis reaction response, they shut down when you need them the most. Corticosteroids do. The third area of chemicals, and the ones that we recognize the most, are the indigenous opioids. They do things like heighten the threshold of pain. How many of you have been involved in something that was horrific, overwhelming, and you got cut or bled, whatever, and you didn't know you were until you looked? Somebody pointed it out and you noticed your arm was bleeding or whatever. That's the indigenous opioid, the heightened threshold, so that you can really focus on survival. There's a couple of negative sides to this. One is this causes emotion, blunting of emotions, feelings of euphoria. You're coming on site, and like this little old lady I just told you about, there was no emotion there, absolutely no emotion. She was just deadpan. That's the indigenous opioids working. She wasn't ready to, really, her mind wasn't ready to accept that everybody was gone. And along with dissociation, amnesia, forgetting about the whole thing. And if you're working in crisis field, I know you've run into that. I can tell you my own experience. I mentioned I was a wildland firefighter. Well, for 25 years, I chased smoke. After the first 5 or 6, we signed reciprocity with the federal government, and from that point on, all the non-snow months, I was west of the Mississippi and above 5,000 feet. Anyway, first fire I was called on, I was assigned to a little fella named Jimmy Groot. And Jimmy was a Sumas Indian from California. One of the greatest guys I ever knew, the greatest guys I ever worked with. Always happy, always solid, always good thinking. I worked with him, and I worked the first shift, and I was going home and he was leaving, and I got an average rating from him. And I said, Jimmy, what are you doing here? I did much you did. He said, yeah, but if I didn't rate you there, I couldn't give you advance next time, so you get a raise. Oh, okay. Anyway, time went on, 10 years or so, we fought fire together, and whatever, we were on the same fire, we'd work together when we could. And on this fire, the last fire in California, we were both division supervisors, which means we were both assigned a piece of fire line. We each had a mile and a half of fire line with about 60 people working on it. And our job as division supervisors were to make sure our line held, that we're safe, and that everybody else was safe. And so as division soups, we would walk the line. We met a couple of times, had lunch together, decided we'd walk out together, because the division soup was always the last person off the line. You shut them down for the night, then walk the whole line, and then you go in. So we did that, and we met, and all the workers were gone. We cruised our lines, and we started back towards camp, walking on the fire line, headed back towards camp. And he said, Case, I had to take a whiz. So he stopped, and I went about 20 feet and stopped. That was the days when you had a cigarette, you used it. And then I did. And I got to stop the tale to tell you the story. When ponderosa pine burns through in the west, and it's a weed tree, very hot, oily needles, the crown fire goes through, and it completely takes every part of the tree except the stem. And when they fall, they get a lot of fire inside of them. And when they fall, there's no noise because there's no wind resistance. The natives call them angel wings. Well, I heard a thump. I turned around, looked, and here angel wings had caught Jimmy. Ran over there. He's got a stab sticking right through his chest. Bled out in about 3 minutes. I realized what happened, and the next thing I remember is I'm back about 3 hours later in the medical tent back at the fire camp. I'm told that I walked in, told everybody about it, and was assigned to the med tent. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember much at all, and I don't remember anything of that walk. So dissociative reactions, amnesia, my unconscious was saying, you don't need to remember that case. We'll just leave that. It also causes blunting of emotions, feelings of euphoria, way out of the place emotions. And I know you work in crisis, you've seen that. And that's also indigenous opioids working. And I'll give you another example. My wife was killed in a car accident a number of years ago. And we lived just 4 miles out of a little town, central Minnesota. We had a daughter that was 7 that was actually getting treatment in Fargo for some things, and twice a month we would take her out there. My wife worked at the high school. I worked at the DNR. So she would drive her vehicle into the high school and park, and then we'd pick her up and go and come back, and then she had a car to come home with. When she left, and 5 minutes later, daughter and I left. And from our place, it was 4 miles into town to go pretty level and down a big hill, up a big hill, and into town. But we got to the top of that hill and we started down, and daughter says, Dad, I can see that's Mom's car down there in the ditch. And I looked and I could see it was too, and I pushed her down on the seat. I could see something hanging out the window. So as I tell you this, I can feel her hair on the palm of my hand right now. Okay, that's what happened to me. Anyway, I coast down. I go coast past where my daughter could look out and see the vehicles, but I didn't want her to do that. As I'm coming to a stop, the law enforcement dude from the little town parked his vehicle between mine and hers, and he said, Case, don't go there. He went over and come back and said, Case, don't go there. So asked what I wanted to do, and I guess I said I should call the in-laws. And so he flagged down the next car going my way, stopped going into town, and took me to my friend's house, where I used his phone, left my daughter there, and my friend took me back to the accident site. And next thing I remember is like 4 hours later, I'm going home with my another friend driving me home. Anyway, about a month later, I had a young fellow come in my office, and he said, Mr. Casey, do you know who I am? I looked at him, I said, yeah, one of the Lapinoy boys from Monaga, ain't you? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm the guy that gave you a ride into town that morning of your wife's accident. So, gee, I'm glad you stopped. I couldn't remember who that was. I really appreciate that. He said, what do you remember about that? So I go back, and I can go back right now and see the same pictures. I see myself getting into the car, my daughter sitting on my lap, and I see us getting to my friend's house and going up that little hill to his door. And I remember you looking at me kind of funny. He said, yeah, you know what that was? He said, you were singing nursery rhymes. I was what? You were singing nursery rhymes. Mary had a little lamb and old MacDonald. Why was I doing that? Blunting of emotions, feelings of euphoria. My unconscious wasn't going to let me go where I needed to go. So you're going to run into this, and that's why I'm explaining this all to you. If you're working in crisis or working psychological first aid, you're going to see this type of stuff. Really out of place reactions. We have a lot of body reactions too that happen. I'm not going to cover much. I just tell you the adrenal gland kick in, so everything's working better. Your thyroid kicks in, so everything is in condition. Endorphins kick in. Well, little hurts, nothing hurts you. That's the bleeding thing. Shuts down the digestive tract. Unconscious says you don't need to work for us to survive, so it's going to shut that down. Takes a while to get that started again. It starts throwing a lot of sugar and making sugar. Pancreas is told start making sugar for short distance energy. At the same time, the liver is told start making cholesterol for long distance energy. Both of those are good. The bad part about that is the cholesterol one. Whatever's built that isn't burned stays in the system. When you're in and out of crisis a lot in your line of work, you're going to have some replumbing done sooner or later. Your heart speeds up. Actually, it doesn't speed up. It just starts pounding harder. Your lungs are breathing in deeper air, and your heart is pumping that deep and thickened air through the thickened blood through the system. And so it really takes a while to get processed. Your skin is the largest organ in the body. If you're in and out of stress a lot, you're going to find your skin will get scaly because the reaction. All of your senses become much more acute and focused, which makes us more prone to accidents. You're doing things and you don't even realize what you're doing. Shouldn't be doing them, but you are. Another thing, there's keys to stress management. This is very, very light getting into it, but the keys are mind what you eat first, diet. Focus on the food that you need. Cortisol levels go up. Body thinks it's starving to death, so eat healthy. Exercise. 132 chemicals in your body. The only way to get rid of them quick is to sweat them out. Let it run. You got this going through your head. Your unconscious is trying to find a fit for it, and it's going to run it until it finds it. So you can either let it run or you can say, no, Tuesday at 7 or whatever. Give it a time and let it run at that time. Pick it up the next time. Deep breathing techniques. One of the Chological Institute's strongest recommendations that's come out over the 20-some years they've been doing their work is that practice breathing technique, deep breathing. When you don't need them, it's there when you do. So, if I had you in class, I'd ask you to breathe in to 8 and out to 10. If you breathe in and breathe out more than you're breathing in, you're going to start dumping carbon dioxide. Most of us use about a third of our lung capacity, and we got a lot of carbon dioxide caught in there. If you start breathing and deeping out more than you're breathing in, you're going to start dumping it. You'll feel better, work better, think better. And the last thing is compassion fatigue. Keys to stress management. Any of you that are working for very long in any given stress situation, compassion fatigue is going to take its toll. It's the cost of carrying. It's the price we pay to do what we do. Let's see. Yeah, chemistry is okay. Things we see with kids: headaches, stomach aches, nausea, eating problems, speech difficulties, skin eruptions. Teenagers are going to see the skin eruptions. If your 5-year-old starts talking like a 3-year-old again, that's chemical. Reactions in adults: sadness, depression, fear, anxiety, anger, irritability, numbness, withdrawal, lack of involvement or enjoyment in things you typically enjoy. That's all signs of crisis. Sense of emptiness or hopelessness. Feelings with children again. Anxiety, vulnerability, fear of recurrence, especially that. Is it going to happen again, Mom? Yeah. Fear of being left alone, particularly if separated from their family. Loss of the sense of safety. Kids need that, and if they don't have it, they really have a hard time processing anything. Depression, anger, guilt, all of those things. Any 4-year-old that you've got in your life and something happens are going to take the blame for whatever it was, because that's where their mindset is. So the same thing with adults. What do we see? Substance abuse. Overprotective of the family. The family involved in it, and then all of a sudden they're not letting them do the things they typically could do because they can't let them. Keeping excessively busy, thinking if I keep doing this, I won't think about it. Who will? Isolating yourselves, family difficulties, being very alert, startling easily. The startle response kicks in. Every one of you, if you've been working in your job for very long, that if you're focused on something and something different happens, we jump, we clear the air. Startled response is one of the big factors for working with crisis. We start avoiding places, activities, or people that may remind us of what happened. From our 4 miles into the house, into the town and that little place, it was a quick 4 miles. For 3 years after that, I would go back a mile, down a mile, over a mile, up a mile, so I didn't have to go past the scene of the accident. It took me 3 years before I could go past the scene of that accident. And I cried quite a bit too, but I did get it done. Things we're going to see. Children with regressive behavior may not be deliberate. Maybe they're acting out, needing attention. Bedtime problems, sleep onset insomnia, midnight awakening, fear of the death, fear of event occurrence. Regressive behavior may include being wet in the bed again type of thing. With adults, we're going to have difficulty concentrating, difficulty with memories, intrusive memories, memories you haven't thought of for a long time. It's going to slap you because they're coming back because your unconscious says, okay, we got to make sure we get this event processed. So let's go back, see how we did that one. Recurrent dreams, nightmares. They typically say that if you're falling in a dream, you've got something going on that you're not in charge of in your life. Flashbacks, going back to the event or past the event where it was safer. We have difficulty communicating and following complicated instructions. A lot of us have that problem anyway. It just gets much more complicated. It's the kids, difficulty in concentrating. Their schoolwork is going to suffer. May appear as behavioral problems in classroom. Confusion, memory loss, disoriented. Actually, schools may be where children function best. In fact, after 9/11, about 5 years later, we did a study, our Green Cross group. And we found that the schools that acknowledged 9/11 the day it happened and went back to doing their regular work, they had about a 10 to 15% reaction rate 5 years later. Those schools that shut down the classes and everybody watched it on television for 6 hours had somewhere around 40 to 60% relapse and problems. And with both adults and children. Things we do is reliance upon faith. And these are affected. Loss of meaning. We're going to be angry at God. Some people very cynical. They question their own values and their own beliefs. The 6 senses: sight, taste, smell, sound, touch, sense. All of these are affected to some degree. And in fact, your unconscious, your best friend, if you're in an overwhelming event, will actually start shutting down your senses so that you don't get overwhelmed. And it'll shut them down from 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 to 1. And for most of us, that one is vision, sight. Now, during the first sleep after a given event, your unconscious will put back as many of those other senses as it can back into working. So when you wake up the next day, number one, you're going to have the purest memory of that event because your unconscious has processed it, but you'll be getting a lot of your senses back too. And we know it's going to be stressful and traumatic if the event is unexpected. Many people die, especially children. The shooting out East Coast rocked the world again. 9/11 rocked the world. Events that last a long time. If we were working with people 6 years after 9/11, still cleaning up. If the cause is unknown, it makes a big stressor. If we can blame it on somebody, it helps us process it. If the event was really poignant or meaningful, that the event was, for instance, the towers, that was supposed to demean America and show us that, you know, we're the power and they can take out the biggest buildings in the world type of thing. If there's a large impact, a large area impacted by the event, it's going to be more traumatic. What do we do for adjustment? Acceptance of the event and our losses. Identify, label, express our emotions. Identify for where they're coming from, what's going on. We need to regain a sense of mastery and control over our life. How many of us have that with COVID-19 right now? How many of you are doing what you were doing in February? Really taking our toll of COVID-19 with this one. So how do we do to promote safety? Remove them from immediate danger and meet basic survival needs. Those two main things. So we're doing crisis work on site. We're doing psychological first aid. That means if we can get them away from what the danger is, or when they're working, we get their mind off the danger and meet their basic survival needs. We were been a couple of people, feeding them, taking care of them. What do we need? Most often people just need somebody to talk to. If you're doing psychological first aid, you're just going to have a hat on that identifies who you are best, so they know you're there to help, and sit down and talk. They need somebody to care, somebody to really listen, somebody to cry with. A lot of times that happens. Someone to be present to them. So if we're working psychological first aid, and I can't tell you how many times this has happened, one of us is working full depth with somebody else, and maybe we need to talk to that person, wherever, we back off. We let them process that before we involve ourselves or interrupt. So be present there, listen, learn to non-verbally accept what they're having to say, and talk to them when you need to. How do you make it clear that you're listening? Non-verbally, how do they know that? First, you're compassionate present. If you're an okay guy, you're not going to do much compassion fatigue work. Psychological first aid work. Body language, eye contact, facial expression, tone of voice, all of those things tell them we're here for you. We're here so that you can listen to us. I'm going to ask questions, qualify, establish sequence of events, put what the slide says is we need to have them put it in place. Give it a structured process. They'll be able to process it a lot better. We're going to see some people upset by it. That's normal also. Just work with them as much as you can. Speak in a calm voice, remain courteous, respectful. We don't ask in-depth description of questions, just wherever they're going, whatever they're talking about, follow along with that. Come to a mutual agreement with what they're talking about. Here's the way you don't do it. Let's talk about something else. You should work to getting over this. You're strong enough to deal with it. I know how you feel. That one there will get you smacked, because they know you don't know how they feel. You'll feel better soon. You did everything you could. You're lucky to be alive. Need to relax. We do things like recommend some if they want to do something, help them do it. Be more useful, less burdensome, less likely to backfire. If you don't know an answer, say, I don't know, but I'll try to help. I'll try to find out for you. Provide basic information about common stress reactions. Our handouts every day are the same but different ways to look at things. Provide basic information on coping, We do typically hand out first aid cards for things to do and also how to contact them. Deep breathing or muscle relaxation techniques. Excessive withdrawal, this is the things that are going to tell us they're really having a hard time with compassion, with psychological first aid. High use of fantasy, impulsive behavior, venting on weaker individuals, overdependent behavior, lack of empathy. Actively seeking strategies for actually seeking assistance. Reacting constructively to environmental challenges, use of non-destructive defenses, humor, exercise, good eating habits. Just give them some things to go home with. Help become active with friends, with pets, big piece of life. Disaster resources, community resources. What do we see in them? Unresponsive to verbal questions or commands, glassy-eyed stare, that 1,000-yard stare. Disoriented, strong emotional responses, easy crying, uncontrollable crying, hyperventilating, rocking, all of those things. Talk about harm to themselves, that's a big one where we have to refer, we have to take them by the hand to someplace. Talk about going to sleep, never waking up, giving away their possessions, excessive use of substances, harm done, child abuse, spouse abuse, loss of control, all of these things are when we need to refer on. If they're telling us this is going to happen, say, okay, that's all I need to know. And I need you to talk to somebody. I think I'm out of time. I have the reference page up there and my contact information if you wish it.
If anyone has any specific questions for Dr. Casey at this time, please feel free to unmute and ask or put them in the chat box. If you need to leave this webinar at this particular time, your evaluations will be sent to you along with the slide deck.